The night my husband stopped coming home, he still slept in my house. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and until last year, my life looked fine. Not perfect, not Instagram worthy, but solid, predictable in a way that felt earned. The kind of life you build slowly, on purpose, when you've learned the hard way that chaos doesn't pay the bills. We lived just outside Madison, Wisconsin, in a quiet neighborhood where people waved when they walked their dogs and complained politely about snowplows. We owned our home together, split responsibilities, shared calendars, paid insurance on time. The kind of marriage people describe as stable and then move on from because it doesn't make for an interesting story. For 6 years, Ethan and I were those people. If you'd asked me then, I would have said we were grown-ups who communicated, that we respected each other's space, that we trusted one another enough not to keep score over every little thing. I would have told you that trust meant not interrogating your partner every time they were late. I believed that. So when Ethan started coming home later than usual, I didn't panic. Not at first. It began subtly. A late dinner here, a quick text there. Running behind, don't wait up. Helping family, be back soon. Normal things, reasonable things. I remember standing in our kitchen one Tuesday evening, reheating leftovers I'd already plated for two, then quietly sliding one dish back into the fridge. I ate alone at the counter, scrolling through my phone, telling myself this was what mature relationships looked like. People had lives. People had obligations. You didn't make everything about you. But nights like that started stacking up. By early fall, Ethan was gone 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, always with an explanation that sounded just believable enough to accept without argument. A cousin going through a rough patch, a family situation that wasn't his story to tell, a request for patience delivered with a tired sigh that made me feel selfish for asking questions at all. And here's the thing I need you to understand. I wasn't suspicious yet. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even afraid. I was confused because he would still come home. Not every night, but often enough. He slept in our bed, left his shoes by the door, drank coffee from his favorite mug like nothing was wrong. And when I asked simple questions, where were you last night? When will you be home tomorrow? He answered just enough to end the conversation. If any of this sounds familiar, I want you to pause here for a second. Have you ever ignored a feeling because it didn't come with proof? Have you ever told yourself you were being dramatic just to keep the peace? If you have, stay with me. Because the problem wasn't that Ethan was gone. It was that every time I tried to understand why, I felt like I was the one doing something wrong. By the time winter came, I had mastered the art of pretending not to notice the empty side of the bed. I stopped asking when he'd be back. I stopped planning dinners. I stopped waiting up. And still, something in my chest stayed tight. Not fear, not jealousy, just the quiet sense that my husband was living a life I wasn't allowed to see. And that was only the beginning.
I've never been the kind of woman who needed to be chased. I was raised to believe that love showed up quietly, in consistency, in responsibility, in doing the small, unglamorous things without being asked, paying the bills on time, remembering doctor appointments, making sure there was always coffee in the house and salt on the sidewalk before a snowstorm. That was me. I didn't just carry my share of our life. I carried the parts that kept everything from falling apart. I managed the mortgage payments, coordinated repairs, handled insurance calls, and kept our shared calendar updated so neither of us forgot birthdays or obligations. It wasn't about control, it was about care. And for a long time, Ethan seemed grateful for that. He used to joke that I was the operating system of our marriage, that without me, nothing would run smoothly. At the time, I took that as a compliment. I thought it meant he saw me as steady, reliable, safe. So when his schedule shifted and his absences grew longer, my first instinct wasn't suspicion, it was accommodation. I adjusted. I told myself family comes first. I told myself that being married didn't mean needing constant reassurance. I reminded myself that trust wasn't something you demanded, it was something you practiced, even when it was inconvenient. There were nights I went to bed alone, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. I'd feel that familiar tug of worry and then push it down, convincing myself that asking for more details would make me the problem. I didn't want to be that wife, the clingy one, the nagging one, the woman who needed updates like a child needing permission. So instead, I swallowed questions and offered space. When friends asked why Ethan wasn't with me at dinner or gatherings, I smiled and said, family stuff. When my mother gently asked if everything was okay, I brushed it off. We're good, just busy. I defended him even when he wasn't there to hear it. What I didn't say out loud, what I barely admitted to myself, was how lonely it felt to share a life with someone who only half lived in it. There's a particular kind of sadness that comes from lowering your expectations 1 inch at a time. You don't notice it happening. You just wake up one day and realize you've stopped asking for things you used to think were normal. Like conversation, like shared evenings, like knowing where your husband sleeps. I told myself that marriages evolve, that not every season looks the same, that love didn't need constant attention to survive. So I kept giving. I kept the house running. I kept his favorite foods stocked even though he was rarely home to eat them. I washed his clothes, paid his share of bills when he forgot, picked up slack quietly so he wouldn't feel overwhelmed. I thought that if I stayed calm long enough, if I proved I wasn't demanding or insecure, things would settle back into place. Looking back now, I realize how much I was protecting him from the consequences of his absence. I was making it easy for him to disappear without disruption. And here's the hardest part to admit. A small, painful part of me believed that if I was patient enough, understanding enough, low maintenance enough, he would choose me again. I didn't want drama. I didn't want confrontation. I just wanted my husband to come home and mean it. Instead, what I got were fragments, a rushed kiss before he left, a vague explanation delivered like a favor, a tired look whenever I asked questions that made him uncomfortable. And still, I told myself this was temporary, because when you love someone, you don't immediately assume the worst. You assume you just haven't been given the full picture yet. I thought sacrifice was proof of commitment. I didn't realize yet that I was the only one making any.
The shift didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a single argument or a dramatic explosion. It was quieter than that, sharper, the kind of change you feel before you can explain it. The first time Ethan snapped at me, it caught me completely off guard. It was a Thursday evening. He was standing by the front door, jacket on, keys already in his hand. I asked, casually, the way I always did, "When do you think you'll be back?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let out this slow, exaggerated sigh, like I'd just asked something unreasonable, something exhausting. "Why do you always need to know?" he said. The word always landed wrong. I hadn't asked every night. I hadn't demanded updates. I had been careful not to. So I laughed lightly, trying to keep it from turning into something bigger. "I'm just asking," I said. "We live together." That's when his expression changed. "You're being a little intense lately," he replied. "It's starting to feel controlling." Controlling? I stood there, confused, replaying my tone in my head. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused him of anything. I'd asked a question most married people wouldn't think twice about. "I'm not trying to control you," I said carefully. "I just want to understand what's going on." "There you go again," he snapped. "You're turning this into a problem when it doesn't need to be one." That was the first time I felt that familiar tightness twist into something hotter. Anger, maybe, or disbelief. Because suddenly, the issue wasn't his absence, it was my curiosity. From that point on, every attempt to talk became a trap. If I asked where he'd been, I was interrogating him. If I asked when he'd be home, I was suffocating him. If I asked why things felt different, he was overthinking. The language shifted subtly but deliberately. Words that once described actions started describing me. Needy, insecure, dramatic. Each one landed like a small cut, easy to dismiss on its own, but together they started to bleed. What made it worse was how confident he sounded when he said them, like he'd rehearsed these lines, like he knew exactly how to flip the conversation, so I walked away questioning myself instead of him. And the more I tried to explain that I wasn't accusing him, the more irritated he became. One night, after he'd stayed out overnight again, I asked, calmly, if he could at least tell me whose house he was staying at. That's when he lost his temper. "Why does it matter?" he snapped. "Why can't you just trust me?" "I do trust you," I said, "but trust doesn't mean being completely in the dark." "You're obsessed with details," he shot back. "Normal people don't need this much information." Normal people. I remember thinking, since when did wanting basic honesty become abnormal? But before I could say that, he grabbed his phone, his jacket, and walked past me like I wasn't even there. That's when the anger finally surfaced. Not explosive anger, not yelling, but a deep, simmering sense of injustice. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a pattern. And patterns tell the truth long before people do. What hurt even more was realizing how comfortable he was making me feel small. He spoke to me like I was unreasonable for noticing my husband was gone most nights, like I was asking for something excessive instead of the bare minimum of transparency. And when I tried to push back, even gently, he doubled down. "You're creating problems," he said one morning. "Everything was fine until you started questioning me." That sentence echoed in my head for days. Everything was fine until I noticed it wasn't, as if silence was the price of peace, as if my role was to accept whatever scraps of explanation he decided to throw my way. The anger sharpened when his family got involved. His sister texted me one afternoon, telling me I needed to ease up and stop stressing him out. His mother called, reminding me how sensitive he'd always been, how important it was not to pressure him. Not one of them asked how I was doing. Not one of them questioned why a married man was sleeping somewhere else half the week. They didn't need to. He'd already framed the story. I was the problem. And that was the moment something in me hardened. Because betrayal doesn't always look like cheating. Sometimes it looks like rewriting reality until the person asking honest questions starts apologizing for having instincts at all. And I was done apologizing.
I didn't fall apart in some dramatic way. There was no screaming into pillows, no shattered plates, no tear-soaked collapse on the kitchen floor. What happened instead was quieter, slower, the kind of breakdown that sneaks up on you while you're still functioning. I remember one night standing in our bathroom, brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection like it belonged to someone else. My face looked the same tired eyes, same faint line between my brows I'd had for years, but something behind them felt dimmer. Ethan hadn't come home again. I knew not to ask where he was. I knew better by then. So I went through the motions alone. Locked the doors, turned off the lights, slid into bed on my side, and stared at the dark ceiling until sleep finally claimed me. That became my routine. And the strangest part was how normal it started to feel. When you live in uncertainty long enough, your body adapts, your expectations shrink, you stop waiting for answers and start managing disappointment instead. But even as I adjusted on the outside, something inside me was unraveling. I'd catch myself rehearsing conversations in my head, how to phrase a question so it wouldn't trigger irritation, how to express concern without sounding accusatory. I was editing myself constantly, like every word needed approval before it left my mouth. That's when I realized something was wrong. Not with the marriage, with me. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. Because I started wondering if maybe I was too much, too attentive, too aware. Maybe I had unrealistic expectations. Maybe wanting to know where your husband sleeps was asking for more than modern relationships allowed. That thought scared me more than anything else. One morning, after another night alone,
I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee growing cold in my hands. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight filtered through the window, casting soft shadows across the floor. And I felt completely hollow. Not angry, not sad, just empty. I thought about how carefully I'd built my life, how intentional I'd been with every choice, and yet here I was, questioning my own sanity because the man I married refused to tell me where he spent most of his time. I asked myself something I hadn't dared to ask before. Why does honesty feel dangerous to him? That question lingered. I replayed our recent conversations, not with the goal of defending him anymore, but with fresh eyes. Every time I'd asked for clarity, he'd responded with hostility. Every time I'd expressed discomfort, he'd accused me of control. Every time I'd tried to talk, he'd shut me down. This wasn't miscommunication, this was deflection, and suddenly everything clicked into place with a dull, aching clarity. He wasn't confused by my questions, he was threatened by them, because questions require answers, and answers require truth. I felt something in me settle then, not relief, not resolve, but certainty. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that simply knows. I stood up from the table and walked through the house slowly, noticing things I hadn't allowed myself to notice before. His overnight bag by the door, clothes missing from the closet, drawers half empty in the bathroom. Physical proof of an absence I'd been mentally tiptoeing around. And for the first time, I stopped blaming myself for noticing. I wasn't imagining things, I wasn't needy, I wasn't unreasonable. I was married to someone who was living a separate life and punishing me for seeing it. That realization hurt, deeply, but it also did something else. It freed me, because once you stop arguing with reality, you can finally decide what to do about it. I didn't know yet what my next step would be. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have anger fueling me forward. What I had was awareness, and awareness, I would soon learn, is where power begins. Once I stopped arguing with reality, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was like a switch flipping from emotion to clarity. I didn't confront Ethan after that realization. I didn't demand explanations or push for confessions. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I went quiet. Not the cold, punishing kind of silence meant to provoke a reaction, but the focused kind. The kind that comes when you stop wasting energy trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. I stopped asking where he was going, stopped checking the clock, stopped rearranging my schedule around his unpredictability. And that's when I noticed how deeply he depended on my uncertainty. The first night I didn't ask anything, he hesitated by the door, looked back at me like he was waiting for a question that never came. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, and for the first time in weeks, it was true. The more I withdrew emotionally, the more restless he became. His explanations grew clumsier, his tone sharper. He wasn't used to not being challenged, or worse, not being needed. That told me everything. When someone panics at your calm, it's because your calm threatens the control they thought they had. I began paying attention, not with suspicion, but with observation. I noticed patterns instead of excuses, timing instead of stories, what he packed when he left versus what he left behind. And then, one afternoon, clarity turned into confirmation. Ethan had left in a hurry that morning, forgetting his laptop charger. It wasn't unusual, he was careless like that. I found it tangled near his desk while I was cleaning, and without thinking much of it, I reached down to unplug it. That's when I saw the envelope. It was tucked halfway under a stack of mail, cream-colored, heavier than the usual junk, addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. Not work-related, not family holiday cards. Something about it felt intentional. I stood there longer than I should have. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want proof, because proof means you can't go back to wondering. But I was done wondering. Inside was a folded note, brief, careful, and devastatingly clear, thanking him for staying over, for being there when things were confusing. The name at the bottom wasn't a stranger's, it was Rachel, his cousin, not by blood, but close enough that the word family had always applied without question. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. Instead, everything slowed. Suddenly, the secrecy made sense, the defensiveness, the way his family rushed to protect him, the way my questions had been framed as threats. This wasn't just betrayal, this was insulation, a network designed to keep me on the outside while he lived comfortably on both sides of the truth. I put the note back exactly where I found it, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need it anymore. I already knew enough. That evening, I made a decision, not a reactive one, not an emotional one, a deliberate one. If Ethan wanted space, he was going to have all of it. I started with the bedroom. I opened the closet and took out his clothes slowly, folding each item with care. Not rage, not sadness, just precision. Shirts, jackets, shoes, toiletries. Each piece felt like closing a chapter. I packed methodically, bag by bag, box by box. I didn't cry, I didn't hesitate. 3 hours passed without me noticing. By the time I finished, his belongings were stacked neatly by the front door, and for the first time since this all began, my chest felt light. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was acting, and I wasn't going to warn him.
I didn't wait for Ethan to come home. That was the point. If I had learned anything over the past few months, it was this. Confrontation only works when the other person is capable of honesty. Ethan wasn't. He'd had countless chances to tell the truth, and every one of them ended the same way, with deflection, accusation, and silence. So I chose a different ending. I loaded the bags into my car just after sunset. The air was sharp with early winter cold, the kind that wakes you up and clears your head. As I closed the trunk, I felt strangely calm, not numb, not detached, clear. I locked the house behind me and drove. Rachel's address was printed neatly on the note I'd found earlier, a townhome complex on the other side of the city. 20 minutes, give or take. The drive felt longer than that, but not because I was anxious. My mind was quiet. No rehearsed speeches, no imagined arguments, no hope of explanations, just certainty. When I pulled onto her street, I didn't slow down to second-guess myself. Her porch light was on, warm, inviting. 2 cars sat in the driveway. One of them was Ethan's. Seeing it there didn't shatter me, it settled me. Because suddenly the truth was no longer theoretical. It was parked neatly behind another woman's car like it belonged there. I carried the bags one by one to the porch. I placed them carefully, not tossed, not scattered. 4 bags, 2 boxes. Everything he'd claimed space for in my life now returned to where he'd chosen to spend it. I stood there for a moment, looking at the pile. This wasn't revenge, it was alignment. I rang the doorbell once, firm, clear. Then I turned around and walked back to my car. I didn't run, I didn't linger. I didn't look back until I was already pulling away. In the rearview mirror, I saw the door open. Rachel stepped out first, confusion written across her face. Then Ethan appeared behind her. Their expressions shifted in real time. Confusion, recognition, panic. Ethan's mouth opened like he wanted to shout my name, but I was already gone. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing. Call after call, text after text, the same cycle he'd put me through for months, only now the urgency was his. What did you do? Answer me. You can't just do this. We need to talk. I didn't respond. I called a locksmith instead. He arrived within the hour. I paid extra for same-day service. Some people might call that impulsive. I call it decisive. By the time the locks were changed, the house felt different. Not empty, mine. The knocking started around midnight, then the pounding. "Lauren, open the door." I didn't move.
I turned on white noise, set my phone face down, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night without wondering where my husband was. The next morning, sunlight woke me before my alarm. The bed beside me was empty, but it didn't feel wrong. It felt intentional. I made coffee exactly the way I liked it. No compromises, no adjustments, just peace. My phone was full of messages by then, some angry, some pleading, some desperate enough to sound almost sincere. I deleted them without reading past the first line. Around noon, his mother called. I answered. "What did you do to my son?" she demanded. I took a sip of coffee before replying. "I returned his belongings to where he's been staying," I said calmly. There was silence. "He was told you threw him out for no reason." "He's been living with Rachel," I said, "for months." Another pause, longer this time. "He was helping her," she said weakly. "No," I corrected. "He was staying with her." She didn't argue after that. Later that afternoon, his brother showed up at my building, demanding to talk, insisting I was overreacting, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. I pressed the intercom button and said, "He built a second life while lying to me. That's not confusion, that's betrayal." Then I ended the call. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. Because the most satisfying part of all of this wasn't watching them scramble. It was knowing I didn't need their agreement to leave. Justice didn't come from yelling. It came from walking away without permission.
The days after everything ended were quieter than I expected. Not the hollow, echoing kind of quiet that makes you feel abandoned, but a clean one, a steady one, the kind that lets your thoughts settle instead of racing each other to the worst conclusion. For the first time in months, my evenings belonged to me. No guessing games, no waiting for a door to open, no rehearsing conversations that never led anywhere. I went back to the gym not to punish my body, but to feel it again. I cooked meals that made the house smell warm and familiar. I reconnected with friends I'd slowly drifted from, not because they'd done anything wrong, but because I'd been too busy managing uncertainty to show up fully. Normal came back, and this time it felt honest. People had opinions, of course, they always do. Some said I was cold for ending things the way I did. Others said I should have heard him out, given him one last chance to explain. A few even asked if I'd ever found out whether he and Rachel were really together before I left. I told them the truth. It didn't matter, because betrayal doesn't require a specific label to be real. Emotional abandonment, secrecy, and lies are enough. You don't need proof of the final line being crossed when trust has already been dismantled piece by piece. I stopped defending my decision. I stopped explaining myself. The people who understood didn't need convincing, and the people who didn't were never going to. One afternoon, a coworker asked me casually if I missed Ethan. I didn't have to think about it. "No," I said, "not even a little." Because what exactly would I be missing? Someone who made me question my instincts? Someone who turned honesty into a threat? Someone who slept elsewhere while expecting to keep a place in my life? No. What I had now, peaceful mornings, quiet evenings, a home that felt like mine, was worth more than anything I'd lost. A few months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ethan and Rachel had gone public. Photos, smiles, a caption about finally choosing happiness. I laughed when I saw it. Not bitter, not angry, just relieved, because it confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't changed. He just stopped hiding. I went on a few dates after that. Nothing serious, just enough to remind myself that decency still exists, that honesty isn't rare, that there are people who don't treat basic communication like an unreasonable demand. One man asked me gently over dinner what had happened in my last marriage. I gave him the short version. He was living a second life, I said, and when I noticed, he made me feel crazy for asking questions. He nodded and said, "Yeah, lying is a deal breaker." No debate, no excuses. It was refreshing. Eventually, I started therapy, not because I was falling apart, but because I finally had space to ask myself why I had stayed quiet for so long.
why I'd confused patience with loyalty, why I accepted being diminished in the name of love. My therapist said something that stayed with me. "You weren't too much," she said. "You were with someone who needed you to be less." That was it. That was the truth. Now, at 38, living alone in a home that feels safe again, I don't regret how I ended things. There was no screaming match, no final confrontation, no opportunity for the story to be twisted one last time. Just clarity. Just a door closing. Just the decision to choose peace without waiting for permission. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the strongest response isn't a reaction at all. Sometimes the cleanest endings happen when you stop chasing explanations. And sometimes trusting yourself means walking away quietly before someone convinces you that your instincts are the problem. If any part of this story felt familiar, you're not alone, and you're not wrong for noticing.